he'll join us when he gets here. I am Jeremy Johnson, and we have a few new panelists up here for the first time today, so I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about what they do, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the questions.
Thank you. My name is Richard Graham. If you can't tell by the cardigan, I'm a librarian. I work at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm very fortunate to be here. In 2012, Abrams put out a book that collected these obscure comics I had collected as part of my research that the U.S. federal and state governments put out. It was called Government Issue, and it was nominated for an Eisner Award in 2012 as well as a Harvey Award. But I lost both of those to Walt Simonson, which is no sweat off of my back. That sort of launched me into a little bit more of the comics world. In 2015, I had the honor of being a judge for the Eisner Awards. So I got to fly out to San Diego and go through a heap of books and discuss things like who the best letterer is and whatnot. I review comics and graphic novels for a website called No Flying, No Tights. And I do research in the sort of what Stan's friend Scott Shaw would call oddball comics. So I look at educational comic books, government comic books, things that tell you not to do drugs or things that tell you not to smoke. And then of course I collect the comics for the collection at Love Library that supports the curriculum because more and more college courses are incorporating comics into the classroom.
You were an Eisner judge in 2015?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's the year I think I won the Lettering Award.
Right.
So thank you. So I'm Stan Sakai, and for the past going on 33 years, I've been doing a comic book called Usagi Yojimbo. And besides Usagi, I freelance. I've done work for other publishers, either covers or miniseries such as 47 Ronin. I've worked with a lot of the people in the industry such as Stan Lee or Will Eisner and Sergio Aragonés, and I'm just fortunate to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Koturba. I am the editorial cartoonist for the Omaha World Herald. I'm in my 27th year. I draw 5 cartoons a week, and my work is syndicated to about 400 newspapers with King Features Syndicate.
I'm Kit Sloan. I'm a student at UNO. I'm here on Dr. Tahanna Kennedy's behalf. She teaches a class called Writing Graphic Memoir. I was a student in the class. I've read comic books for most of my life, and I'm a fellow cardigan enthusiast. That's really where all of my credibility and expertise ends. So I'm real sorry about it, but I'm going to try my best.
And my name's Cullen Bunn. I've been writing comics professionally for about 10 years. I've loved comics all my life. I write a book called The Six Gun that just came to an end for Oni Press. I do a book called Harrow County for Dark Horse. And I write Uncanny X-Men for Marvel and a lot of Deadpool books for Marvel. I write some other stuff too. I don't know. I write a bunch of stuff. Too much to keep up with.
All right, and then as I mentioned, my name is Jeremy, and I work at UNO. And at UNO, I teach a history of American comics, but then I also teach a Exploring Global Comics course. So if anybody's interested in taking an online course, you're welcome to do so. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask each panelist a question, and then if you'd like to, the rest of you would like to respond afterwards, you're more than welcome to do so, okay? All right, so Stan, why don't we start with you? So all the characters in Usagi Yojimbo are anthropomorphic, or animals given human characteristics. Would you be able to discuss how this allows you to approach topics that would be difficult to comment on if the characters were human?
Well, animals like Aesop's fables, they're like universal, so I don't have to even though Usagi takes place in the feudal Japan, they're not necessarily Japanese, and all the problems are, everyone's problems. People can relate to them. Actually, probably making them animals makes them more accessible. And I'm not that good at drawing people, so no, actually that's not true. My 47 Ronin was based upon, had real people and was actually based upon a historical incident. But I just love drawing animals. Usagi literally means rabbit, so it's rabbit bodyguard. And I did not start out drawing animals. It was not my intention. I wanted to draw real people, do a series inspired by the life of a real-life samurai named Miyamoto Musashi. But I just happened to come up with this rabbit with his ears tied up into a chun monkey, a samurai top knot. And I stayed with that character for, like I said, more than 30 years now. But I don't think using funny animals is deterrent to having people, not relate to my characters. So, in fact, I think it enhances it.
Considering this political climate, I'm now going to consider drawing all the candidates as animals.
Okay, Jeff, since you spoke, we'll go ahead with yours. Now, your job as an editorial cartoonist is to make commentary about the world around us. Could you describe your process for selecting your topics, choosing a viewpoint to represent, and dealing with readers who may oppose your work?
What was the last part again?
Dealing with readers who may oppose your viewpoint.
Everybody's so sensitive, and we were talking earlier about how polarized everything has become. And when I'm picking out my cartoons, my subjects. By the way, I have Tourette's syndrome, but I promise to not start swearing too much. If you see me twitching, it's part of the creative process. Actually, as a quick tangent, I'm one of those people who believes that there's a connection between Tourette's syndrome and creativity. Most people who have Tourette's tend to have some kind of creative bent. Anyhow, and I actually think the Tourette's is part of my coming up with ideas. I will sometimes notice that if I am watching or reading about a particular political candidate and I start getting twitchy, I think, maybe I should follow this, and there's an idea there. So it's weird. The challenge these days, at least during this political cycle, is sometimes what not to draw. It is so easy to draw about Trump and Hillary, and I'm an independent, so I take equal shots at both. They're both deserving of it. And it would be so easy for me to every day draw about Trump and Hillary because everybody knows about that, because we're not only inundated with that through the local paper, but in all forms of media. So the greater challenge for me lately has been to find topics that aren't on the campaign. And I do a mix of local and international and national stuff. So that has been the challenge. And so sometimes I just follow my gut. It's not necessarily always following what is the headline, what is the top story. Yes, if it's an obvious big story, then sure, I probably should draw about it. But I don't always feel obligated, and sometimes there's a part of me that wants to go in the opposite direction and find the topic that no one is talking about to draw more attention to it. And whether that's a local issue on, a city council issue, potholes or whatever it is, but topics that are near and dear to my heart, child welfare and child abuse and those kinds of things that I can never draw enough about those topics. Kids who are suffering, for example. So I will sort of follow my gut and in my head and follow the news and what people are talking about, but also what is in my gut and what I feel the need to draw about. And as far as the reader goes, again, everybody is so sensitive, but I feel like if my commentary is rooted in good journalism, based in fact, yes, with my opinion, but my opinion is based in fact, and I'm not just name calling. If people are upset by that, then let the chips fall where they may. I don't go out of my way to piss people off and to anger them or to be controversial. That is not my goal. It's to have good commentary. And again, if in the process I upset people, then I feel fine with that. But I am really going to start going into the animals.
Richard, you've written several books on comics such as Government Issue, Comics for the People, and Comic Book Movies. And you peer review the online journal Sequential Art Narratives in Education, correct? Okay. How do you respond to issues of diversity such as race, gender, sexuality? How do they play out in some of your research that you do?
Well, I'm not a gender studies researcher per se, and looking at me, I'm a young white guy. But in my research, which is looking at how comics can teach or cause a change in behavior, it's hard not to come across several instances where you see gender or race issues smacking you right in the face. Comics can teach us a lot of things in different ways. So, for example, when we see Will Eisner in Army Motors magazine depicting African American soldiers, that tells us a lot about the social mores, about what's acceptable representation or accepted visuals. Or when you come across the Milton Caniff Army pamphlet depicting Japanese people and how you're supposed to tell the difference between them and Chinese people, which comes at a time culturally during World War II when we used to view through our media the Chinese as Fu Manchu types, as evil and conniving, and then after World War II we had to be educated on who to hate, and now we like the Chinese and now we hate the Japanese. And so when you come across these kind of comics, there's this interlap that slaps you in the face. In addition, I remember coming across a 1990s comic book that the Army put out that was started under under Clinton, under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then came out under George Bush, which is this horribly drawn and horribly written comic about coming out in the service. And I had so coming across, I had the opportunity to discuss some of the authors out of Virginia. And when you make a comic book, it's kind of a lot like a movie. There are a lot of people involved in the process, but there's also a lot of extreme editing and vetting. So you can imagine what happens when the US government cranks out a comic book and the kind of messages they want to ensure get said or told. And they don't keep it very real, is pretty much the point in terms of how they sanitize and how they propagate a message. When you read an Army recruitment comic from the 1950s, then it's no accident that the protagonist is a white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes who thinks it is great to join the Army and is cowardly to not, right? So what you see then is this perpetuation of dominant status quo ideology, or hegemony, to use a $10 word here. So to me, that's fascinating, even though that's not something that I'm necessarily looking for. I'm interested, like when Caterpillar puts out a comic book showing you how to operate their machinery, trying to hit various literacy rates. Another aspect of my research, and let me know if I'm hogging too much time here, but part of the university's goal is to collect sort of the mission of the university, so part of the university library's goal is to collect the history of the university, as well as collect aspects of famous alum. So, of course, we have Willa Cather's Bra, and Mary Sandoz's journal. But people like S. Clay Wilson have come from UNL, and so you see that sometimes people are stigmatized or sort of left out because of their profession. But so I said, hey, there's this guy named S. Clay Wilson. He was there with Zap Comics with Robert Crumb maybe we should start collecting. So in that regard, I come across, why I'm wearing the shirt, Rose O'Neal, the creator of the Cupid doll, whom Trina Robbins has pointed out was the very first female panel artist. Well, guess where Rose O'Neal got her start? At the Omaha World Herald when she was 14 years old, right? And she was a multi-millionaire because of the Cupid doll. But when I talk with fellow comic scholars about the history of comics, we always talk about Richard Outcault, we talk about Sidney Smith, we talk about these sort of people who made millions of dollars and had a lasting effect on popular culture. But because Rose O'Neal was probably a woman, and because Rose O'Neal put out Cupid dolls, which, believe it or not, there are still organizations that celebrate it, she was marginalized because of her gender in that regard too. So that's how I see it. And I'll kind of wrap it up quickly and say that when I'm collecting comics for the library and seeing how they're used in the curriculum, I'm collecting more memoir, more graphic self-biographies, and less superhero stuff. And that's because, right, when you see where Frank Miller signs his name on the inside of a lady's thigh, or you see how Wonder Woman is wearing not at all appropriate battle clothing, you can see that the demographic readership is very skewed. And so to be more inclusive, to be more relevant, and to explore further ideas and theory, we see a lot more graphic memoir, especially like Alison Bechdel's Fun Home or Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis. I see a lot more of that sort of stuff, and so I see more and more of a decline in superhero comics in terms of readership in that regard. And it's the same thing with the types of books I review as well. We're trying to get more people to read, have more women show up at events like this, more persons of color. So of course we're looking at all sorts of titles, not just the mainstream stuff. So, thanks.
And that goes along with, to go along with that is, thinking about disability in comics as well. And that's something we want to keep in mind. Hawkeye had a hearing impairment back in mid-'80s, and then it was written out, and it just only recently resurfaced when David Aja and Matt Fraction relaunched the Hawkeye title, and then you have Daredevil and those things. So, being able to portray those stereotypes, or trying to play down those stereotypes and get those characters more accurately portrayed. Colin, you've written comics for several small publishers as well as mainstream publishers such as Marvel and DC. Can you describe the contrast, if any, from various publishers when it comes to addressing sensitive or controversial topics?
There's a lot of differences between these publishers, and usually the line for me, it's not just writing for small publishers and writing for big publishers. You're defining a line between creator-owned for me and work-for-hire work. So that's where it's, with creator-owned, there is no line. I do what I want to with those characters, and I address what issues I want to address or not address. And there are times where I make the conscious decision I'm not going to bring something to the foreground that's maybe a sensitive issue just because it will derail my story. And what I'm trying to do in certain books is I'm trying to tell a story. People are going to read in everything they need to on a lot of these things, so I don't need to worry about it. But if I wanted to do something with a creator-owned book, as long as the publisher has, as long as I've gotten the publisher to accept the project, I'm going to do what I want to, and they're not going to step all over me. Some different with different publishers. Some publishers are a little more, they don't care. They're not going, if a writer wants to do something that's sensitive, if a writer wants to, or an artist wants to do something that is offensive, they're either unaware or I like to think they're unaware. And a lot of times, even as a writer, I'll write something unaware that it may be offensive in some person. I'm a human being. That's gonna happen. And sometimes it's, I'm not gonna, every book I put out is not gonna be a home run. And sometimes I'm gonna miss the point, and sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. And I like to think that in those cases, it's not that editors don't care or the publishers don't care. I like to think they're unaware just like I was. And hopefully they'll learn from those mistakes, just like I'll learn from those mistakes when I make them. Other publishers, you notice how I'm not saying any names of who these publishers are. Other publishers are hyper aware of these issues, and they will be heavily involved in. I did not just turn that off. There, you got all the answers. That's really good, because I was at a publisher a couple of weeks back, and we were in a meeting room, and I noticed there's a camera sitting over in the corner, it looks like a video camera that you would do video conferencing. And as we're all sitting in the room, every now and again the video camera would just turn and would focus on us, and it would turn back. And I said, guys, that camera's moving. They said, no. I was like, God, that camera is moving. Other publishers are hyper aware of it. They are very concerned with offending the readership. Sometimes rightfully so. I think they take it too far. So I think there are times when people take it too far. And I've written stories where the editor comes to me and they say, well, you need to change this last page because it's just so dark and so terrible. And I was like, well, that's the point. And then when I change it, and it's sort of really a bland story. Sometimes as a writer, I feel like I have to go into an area that is not comfortable, is not fun, is dark, and is going to offend someone, and isn't going to be sensitive. And I also have to feel like as a writer, it's not my job to put my sensibilities in every page, and every character is not going to behave as I would behave or believe what I believe. And there are publishers specific editors who are very, very careful about everything you say, and they're really going to try to change those things. Sometimes they're right, and sometimes I have to fight for, no, I know that this is going to rub people the wrong way, and that's the point. But if I were writing a creator-owned thing, I would never have to argue that. With work for hire, it has to be something that I believe in, and sometimes they'll say, hey, people are going to read this in a certain way, and they're like, oh yeah, you're right, I didn't intend it that way, let's change it. And sometimes I have to fight for, I want people to read this and be upset about it.
Do you ever look back and have regrets that you weren't edited more heavily?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, all the time there are things that I wish that I hadn't done because I didn't see it as offensive. And I'll be honest, there are things now that I see offended people, and I still don't see it as offensive. But I'm like, okay, I get it that I upset people by doing this. I wish someone had told me then, and I could have at least thought about it and I could have at least made that choice. If this is going to offend people, I'm doing it for the right reasons, because I'm not going to offend people I don't want to offend people by accident necessarily, because I did something out of ignorance. And I think there's also a difference in the fandom of those two things. When you get into creator-owned, fans of creator-owned are actually a lot more accepting of those things. They understand that there are going to be stories that are going to upset them. There are going to be elements of stories that are going to push some boundaries. In work for hire, let's say Marvel and DC stuff, the fans, I would love to think that all the people that get really upset about things I've done or that other creators have done, I would love to think that they've actually read the comics, but I don't. I very rarely think reviewers read most of the comics that they're reviewing. So it's an interesting thing that there's much more sensibility of, I heard this happened in a book, and I'm going to jump on you about how awful that is. And it's a tough. It makes it very difficult, I think, for creators. And I've sat in rooms where creators have said, well, Captain America is going to be, I don't even know how much of that story has been revealed. But Captain America is going to be revealed as a double agent for Hydra, and everybody in the room goes, oh, you can't do that. That's going to offend so many people and upset so many people. And it absolutely is. It's going to upset people. And some people got upset for reasons that no one expected. And some people got so upset they were issuing death threats. And there's just that level of, there's something about the super, I think it's because people are so invested in these characters, they feel sort of a sense of ownership on those characters. But there's something on those fandoms that's also, I always have to keep that in mind When I'm writing creator-owned thing, very rarely do I say, oh, someone's really going to be upset about this, and they're really going to send me hate mail, and I'm going to get a death threat on this. I've never thought that when writing a creator-owned book. And some of my creator-owned stuff gets really dark and goes into some really disturbing territory. But I've never once thought that. But I always think it with Marvel and DC. I'm always wondering, uh-oh.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
Related to that same thing, do you think part of that is because when you're writing Six Gun, the readers, so when I'm reading Six Gun, I think of those as your characters, but if you're writing Captain America or something else, I think a lot of people view those as our characters that you happen to be writing. I don't know if that's different.
No, I think that's absolutely a big part of it. I think with a lot of those characters, Captain America, people who are Captain America fans, even passingly Captain America fans, they have an image in their mind. This is what Captain America is. This is who he represents. You know, this is what he represents, who he is, and it goes across the board for every character. Every character that you write in a Marvel book or a DC book is somebody's favorite character, no matter what you think. And even characters, and it goes so far as I'll create, but it goes far. Like Fearless Defenders, I created a character named Annabelle Riggs. And she was a lesbian. And in issue 6, I kill Annabelle Riggs. I got so much hate mail, so much terrible hate mail about killing Annabelle Riggs. And it was they were angry. The people that really were angry because they felt like I had given a source of representation that was great, and I had taken it away from them. And they're right. I mean, from that perspective, they were right. Now, it didn't matter. Annabelle came back in issue 7. She was alive again. But people, I still get emails from people who are very angry at me that I killed Annabelle for really not even one page of a comic. She died at the end of issue 6. She was alive at the beginning of issue 7. I still have people who are very angry at me for the representation of that character, and I get it. But I wrote that character with an arc. I knew where she was going. I knew what was going to happen, and I wasn't going to protect Annabelle in order to protect representation. That wasn't my job. I had a story for Annabelle, and you know, I love that character. She's gone now because no one else wants to write the character. Nobody writes Annabelle. They've forgotten her. But every pitch I send to Marvel says, "Hey, Annabelle Riggs shows up in this," and like, no.
Did you bring her back?
Yeah.
Because of the pressure?
No. She was
part of
the issues where she died and came back were written months and months ahead of any of the pressure. And if I'd have had that where people were pressuring me to bring her back, and I had that, I'd have stretched it out just because I get a little bit snarky when it comes to this. So anyway, I don't think I answered anything you asked, but that's all right.
Yeah, I did. Actually, you kind of referenced, you know, you get in the fan mail, you know, worried about death threats. Do you ever respond to any of the fans? Any Jeff or Stan?
Early on, I did. Early on, I could not help but respond to people. And because I was getting angry, I'd get angry and I'd say, well, I'm going to say something to this guy. And then I changed my tune. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be angry about it. And I'd have someone who'd say something really cruel. I mean, they'd say cruel things like, man, Cullen Bunn should be fired, and I hope Cullen Bunn should be fired, and I hope he dies. So I wrote back just jokingly, man, me too. What a peaceful life that would be. And then I got hit with dozens of people saying I was bullying this person. So, honestly, I want to. I still want to. Everything makes me want to respond to these folks, but it's so much easier if I don't. And nowadays, when I see those things, and we see it in either reviews or on a website or a podcast or whatever we hear it, I have a couple of creator friends that I'll point it to them. I'll say, look what this jerk said.
When I first started responding to readers, I would write back and point out their spelling and grammatical errors, sort of my defense mechanism. I do respond to everyone who writes to me, whether they're critical or not. And in fact, it's the people who are angry, I tend to gravitate more. It's nice to get fan mail, but it's more fun to engage with people who are angry. But more often than not, people will write back and they'll say, whoa, I didn't actually think someone in the media would write back to me, and they kind of back down and they say, I'm really sorry, I was angry at you, but I generally like your work. But there are those people who are angry no matter what. And I'm all about, I don't care if you agree with me, and in fact, sometimes I disagree with me later and think, what was I thinking? But I love a good conversation and people who are able to think critically and have a reasonable, rational discussion. And we may agree to disagree at the end of the day, but I enjoy those conversations. But there are some people who, no matter what, just want to argue and call you names, and at that point, I'll cut off the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference. If someone wants to have a rational conversation and say, hey, this is why I disagree with what you did, I'm so open to it. I'm interested in those conversations, and I'll do that. But so often, it's never from that point of view. It's from an angry, they're angry, and they just want you to know they're angry. And that's hard to have a conversation with someone like that. Because I can be swayed. I've already said here that I did things that I think I did out of ignorance, and I can be swayed to people's points of view. But, when you're super angry about it, it's hard to have any kind of conversation. Anyone else want to talk about fans?
I don't get hate mail. No, I get mail. They're mostly because it's a create-your-own product, and whatever I decide is the way the story goes. The only time I actually got negative mail, well, actually there were 2 times. The first time was that I killed a pet lizard. And so, oh my God, you bastard, you killed Spot. He's a lizard. And the other time, when Usagi went to, from black and white to color, when we went to, it was published by Mirage Publishing, people just preferred black and white because they like to see the artwork. And actually, I preferred it black and white as well. And those are just about the only 2 times. I do get strange requests. I was telling, I think it was John back there, that once I got a call out of the blue, guy say, oh, I love Usagi. I'm at LAX airport, can you pick me up? And things like that, but basically, I get pretty good mail, and we do have a letter section, so I do respond to them.
Okay, Kristen, you were in Tammy's Writing the Graphic Memoir course. Could you talk about that class just real quickly and the approaches it took to maybe kind of teasing out some of these issues of diversity?
Yeah, totally. So writing graphic memoir is a very cool class at UNO. The only thing that sucks about it is it's a night class, so it's like 3 hours, but there are snack breaks. And what's really cool is Dr. Kennedy really sort of exposes us to a lot of different graphic memoirs right off the bat. Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis. There's a book called Stitches. I can't remember the guy's name. His first name is David, so someone can Google that.
David Small.
Yes. And Marbles. I also forget the author of that one. I have notes somewhere. I'm very sorry. But no, so we're exposed to stories from queer authors, people who are neurodivergent, people of color. So we're already exposed to a lot of very diverse stories. There's also an exercise that Dr. Kennedy had us do in class where one of the projects we do, because the whole point of writing graphic memoirs throughout, you learn how to write your own graphic memoir. Spoiler alert, you write a memoir at the end. So one of the activities we did is you had to list pretty much all the identities you gathered throughout your life, whether it was something you were born with, whether it was something that you earned, whether it was positive, negative, you just made a list of them, and then one of your projects was to make a piece that explored that identity. So already people are dealing with various identities they have throughout their lives, and it's also just, writing a graphic memoir, you already sort of have like your own perspective and your own story that you want to tell, so I think that already gives itself to really adding to voices that weren't necessarily available in comics before. The class is also, I believe it's a medical humanities credit for the medical humanities minor, and it's also my minor, the LGBTQIA sexuality studies minor. So it's already, I mean, like within the class itself, you're already aware of the fact that you are going to be talking about various different identities that you yourself might not identify with or that you're not familiar with. So even before you start writing your own story and thinking about your own identities and how they differ from other people, you're exposed to stories that are already very complex and have a lot to do with the personal identities of the people who are writing them. I think that's my answer.
It seems like there's so much diversity in graphic memoirs, and why do you think it's more in graphic memoirs than it is across? Not that there isn't diversity in all sorts of literature and in general memoirs, but it does seem like there's more. And maybe I'm off on that. But
No, I would say graphic memoirs do seem to seem. I mean, like I read a lot of superhero comics, a lot of independent comics. But there are not near as many really cool queer people as there are in graphic memoirs, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, you know, to introduce a queer character or a person of color or anything like that into like a mainstream comic is going to be met with a lot of resistance, I think, because again, people really cherish these characters. When Captain America was revealed to be a Hydra agent, I was very upset. I made a really long Tumblr post about it. Because, you know, those are characters that people hold very dear and they have their own headcanons about who they are as a person, but you can't argue the canon of someone else. So within a memoir, when you're talking about yourself, no one can argue with your own identity. So you're really allowed to talk about things from your own perspective. My final piece was talking about breaking up with my girlfriend 4 days after my grandma died because bad things always have to happen all at once. So I really got to explore, you know, being queer, not being out to my grandmother at the time that she passed. And it was like, no one can argue with me that that was the wrong thing to do or the wrong things to address because it's my story, which is very different from, you know, if it was Captain America or Deadpool or anyone like that.
Yeah, and there was also a big uproar when Thor became a woman too. So it's everywhere. So as we start to wind down this panel, does anybody in the audience have questions for our panelists? Yes, sir.
Specifically for editorial cartoons, my appeal to comic books, the majority has been satire and the ability to kind of punch upward on behalf of the reader sometimes, and then sometimes you run afoul of it because you'll find an artist that you followed and agreed with will sometimes battle your opinions and your beliefs. Have you ever had a time when you've written something and you think, I believe in this, I think it'll get support, but I worry about my readers being on board, considering that I had this other line of thought that might seem contrary? I'm just curious, like, how much consideration you give to your readership and maybe your personal image when you take a stand for your art?
That's a great question. I do think about that. I mean, I don't think I'm going out of my way to play to the audience. I do feel like I have to be true to my core principles, my true beliefs. And as I said earlier, you know, let the chips fall where they may. I guess maybe, could you just say a little bit more about that? I'm not maybe quite sure I'm grasping what you're...
For instance, you know, when you kind of punch out against the powers that be, and it just seems like you're calling BS on a lot of things that we all kind of get sick of or think we're smarter than. But then suddenly, maybe you'll get sentimental. Say around an event like 9/11, and it seems like you hop back in step with the establishment.
I see.
I mean, even though it's heartfelt, have you ever had a moment like that where you thought maybe your fans may take it as disingenuous?
Oh, sure. I mean, of course. I do try, and I don't know. I think, you know, most of us who are doing, you know, any kind of writing or drawing, you know, a good writer, a good artist has to filter the work. You take a step back and separate yourself from the work. And, you know, I'm not so in it that I can't step back from it and look at it. I hope. I mean, it's still through my eyes, but I try to look at it objectively. And how will people respond to this? and whether it's being overly sentimental or, you know, because of sensitivities running so high, I do try to look at it from every angle, but I also, again, have to bring it back to, this is really what I believe, and sometimes, you know, in the case of being sentimental, sometimes I am sentimental or melancholy, and I don't care, like, because I do think that people are reading me for a reason, and so whether one day I'm being overly critical on candidate, the next day I'm being sentimental, I think it adds to the variety and tapestry of my work. I don't know if I'm fully addressing what you're saying, but I don't know if I did something.
Anybody else have a question?
I answered the rest of the question with telepathy, just in case anybody picked up on that. It was brilliant.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, sir.
When you're working on the X-Men, what do you find is the greatest character to work on? Like, who through your eyes is one of the, you know, your epitome of this is why I really like doing this?
Oh, that's such a tough question. I mean, because part of it is, you know, I love the X-Men. You know, I collected X-Men when I was a kid. My dad and I collected X-Men together, and I sold my X-Men collection to pay for college. And, you know, it's, so those characters mean a lot to me anyway, just across the board. A lot of times it surprises me. The difficulty as a fan who writes comics is I always think, you know, I'm gonna love this character because I loved, this may not be, but Nightcrawler. Oh, I love Nightcrawler. He's my favorite, so I'm gonna love writing Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler's not the character that surprises me, or I think I can tell the most compelling stories with. I wrote a series based on Magneto, the Magneto series, a couple of years ago. And when I took that book, I was like, I just don't think I'm gonna enjoy writing about Magneto. And now he's become one of my favorite characters to write because there's so many compelling stories to tell with him, exploring that point of view that is so, that he's seen so many terrible things, and he's so haunted that he has himself become a terrible thing. And I think there's a lot of stories to tell with that character, and I think that offers a lot of flexibility on different kinds of stories to tell. So Magneto is easily my favorite character to write right now, although he's probably not my favorite character as a fan.
Okay, so I have one last question. Get some feedback there. One last question for you. For the future creators or current creators, what advice would you give them when it comes to including diversity, you know, whatever that encompasses, sexuality, gender, disability, into their own work?
I'll take it.
All right.
So I think I'm gonna go ahead and guess that I'm the youngest person on this panel, so I'll be. Well. Amazing. Very handsome. I think, just from my own perspective, I love seeing diversity just because, I mean, my youngest brothers are 8 and 6, and I like to think, I was telling them today that I was doing this panel, and they were like, so you're going to talk about comic books, you're going to talk about the Avengers? And I was like, well, I'm going to talk about different stuff. But I would like to think that eventually my brothers can be exposed to stories about people who aren't necessarily straight white boys, so that they can get other perspectives, and also so people who are people of color, who identify as queer, who don't necessarily have that representation today. I would love to see that representation just because it's so important to find stories that you personally can identify with. And, you know, since that's not always readily available today, it does hurt some communities. So I think having that diversity is really important for the future so that everyone can get involved in comics and everyone can enjoy them at the same level.
Is it about identifying or also just being, you know, open to explore, you know, finding other
Oh no, absolutely. I don't think that you would like have to like identify as something to write these kinds of characters, but I mean like representation does matter, which is why Dead Lesbians is problematic. It's really great that you brought her back, but it's really sad, you know, for people who are lesbians to see such great representation, and statistically almost every lesbian character that's like a really decent representation, she dies. So basically what that tells lesbians, I'm also really into rhetoric, so I'm sorry if I'm going like way too deep, but like what happens is, and it's not necessarily, obviously that wasn't your intention to be like, well, if she's a lesbian, she deserves to die, but
And I'm not trying to make an argument,
no.
but in a way, and I apologize, I haven't read that particular storyline, but in a way that seems more realistic. People die, and it seems more respectful in a weird way, in a contrary way, that she would die.
And, you know, I said that I felt like that's what I was doing. I was representing the character, and I was like, you know, the moment I protect her, I'm doing something, I'm actually doing the opposite of what I'm trying, you know, of representation. But that's not what people see it. And I didn't, at the time, I didn't see that people were going to see it that way.
No, absolutely. I think there's definitely a necessity for diversity in storytelling. However, when we're like just now getting those characters, there is a very negative connotation in having so many negative things happen to them. And yes, that is very true to life. It's very true that, you know, everyone's going to die at some point. So obviously a lesbian woman is going to have to die. But the problem is there are so many characters, so many points of view that are going unheard and aren't necessarily being represented in a positive light. So if there were more lesbian characters, if there was, you know, like one really great lesbian superhero or something like that that other people could look to, that they wouldn't necessarily have to go to every lesbian or ever whatever they identify as their representation, that, you know, then it wouldn't really necessarily be a big deal if she died. But I think, you know, it becomes less of an issue once there is already more diversity. So once we reach a point where there is a lot more diversity in media and comic books and stuff like that, then I don't know, personally, this is just my opinion, then it would make more sense to have, you know, much more complex stories. But first we have to get the voices out there.
So, the one thing I would you did that on purpose. The one thing I would say is, I think everybody can hear me, right? Yeah. When you're working on books, I think it absolutely is important to bring more diversity to the medium as a whole, both in terms of characters and creators. But when you're creating a book and you're looking at incorporating diverse characters, I feel like I've always had a lot of my books, especially my creator-owned stuff. I really focus on diverse cast and bringing in different kinds of characters than what you may normally see in comics. But that's not always the case, and I feel like that's the important thing. Is if you're a creator and you're looking, and if you ever sit down and say, "I'm going to make my cast diverse because that's what people want," that way leads stereotype, and it's got to be true to the story you're telling, true to the characters that you're portraying. I don't think any creator should ever try to make a cast more diverse just because they're trying to fill a quota or to hit some sort of, you know, something that's going to be popular on Twitter or Tumblr. I think if you're doing it just for that, then you're going about it the wrong way.
I feel that way with drawing animals.
Yeah, for me it's a story that's important. I mean, I've done stories about blind swordsmen, one-armed swordsmen, but again, it's for the story. The story is the most important. You can't just toss in gay or whatever characters just for the sake of being in there. I mean, but then I have gotten questions like, why haven't you ever drawn a giraffe in Usagi? I don't know. That never just caught my, crossed my mind. And but again, for me, it's a story that's important, and
Well, as a reviewer of comics, I would just say, since I'm not a creator, but I think that
it's just to just have a diverse life yourself.
mean, no weirdos. Have all kinds of people in your life, so when you write your story and you incorporate them in your story, it's more authentic. It's not a placeholder or a stereotype, right? I think we told or heard a lot of stories come from within. So surround yourself with diverse people. They'll bleed their way into your stories, and then you'll have a more authentic voice, and you don't have to worry about placeholding or stereotyping, or that you have the burden. I mean, you're a straight white guy, I'm going to assume, but now you have this burden of perpetuating, keeping this lesbian character alive because there's so few lesbian characters to look up to, right?
Sales field,
You know, I mean, at some point, right? So just enrich your life, and it'll come out in your art, and everything will be honky-dory.
All right, well, let's thank our panel.